Assalamu alaikum, students. I hope you're feeling good. We've been discussing quite a few of essays on various topics written by Francis Bacon, the eminent essayist. The topic that we're going to be working with today is of simulation and dissimulation. Now, these two words might be strange for some of you, but don't worry, Bacon is going to explain these terms before he goes on to show how they are applicable to our life. If you remember from the previous lectures, what I have always been emphasizing is the fact that Bacon does not just talk about one aspect of life, but he's talking about different aspects of life, and his knowledge is such that it is not difficult for him to move from one topic to another and to show his expertise as an essayist equally, no matter what the topic that is being discussed. So let's move on to of simulation and dissimulation and see what Bacon has to say about simulation and dissimulation. Now, he starts off with a definition of dissimulation because he's sort of taken for granted that his readers already know what simulation means. So simulate means when you try to adopt something, when you try to do something that is different from what you normally do. So you simulate. You're not actually doing it, but you pretend that you're doing it. So he defines dissimulation, and he says dissimulation is but a faint kind of policy or wisdom, for it asketh a strong wit and a strong heart, to know when to tell truth and to do it. Therefore, it is the weaker sort of politics that are the great dissemblers. Now, one thing that you notice in this slide is that Bacon uses certain words differently from the way that they are being used in contemporary English. One aspect that I have pointed out very frequently is the way he uses the ETH endings. And if you remember from the previous lectures, I told you that the ETH ending has in these 400-500 years been replaced by the S, the letter S. So when he uses asketh, you would now say asks, and you'd say, why should anyone take such a lot of effort to pronounce a simple word? But we're talking about English language in the 16th and 17th centuries, and these are the prevalent spellings. Now, you'll notice one thing, that Bacon does not just use different spellings, but he also uses certain words differently from how they are used now. And the one word that strikes your attention most of all is the word politics. When there is election year, everybody is talking about politics. Even outside the election year, you see that people frequently talk about different politicians and the policies of a particular political party. Now, the way in which Bacon uses the word politics is very different. So when he talks about the weaker sort of politics, he's not talking about politics as you and I would discuss today, but he is using it in the sense of a politician, not politics, but a politician, a person who indulges in politics. So when he talks about dissimulation, he says it is like a policy. When you're pretending to be something different from what you are, some people adopt this as a policy. It's not that they are liars. You wouldn't call them liars. I'm sorry for the slip up between lawyers and liars, but we very frequently associate liars and lawyers with each other. So coming back to dissimulation, Bacon says that dissimulation is but a faint kind of policy or wisdom, for it asketh a strong wit and a strong heart. So not only does it ask or demand a strong presence of mind, which is what he means when he says a strong wit, but it also needs a strong heart. You must be emotionally strong if you are going to dissimulate. And he'll give you the reason why you need to have a presence of mind and to be very strong emotionally. Because what you're going to do is tell the truth sometimes and not at other times. Now, I know we've all been brought up to say that you must speak the truth and honesty is the best policy and all the other cliches. But Bacon is talking about real life. He's not talking about book knowledge. He's talking about what works in real life. And you need to remember that Bacon was a courtier, he was a jurist, he was a lawyer, he was also a theologian. So whatever he's saying, his knowledge is based upon his experience, his reading, and whatever he gained out of his position as a courtier in the court of first Queen Elizabeth I and later on King James I. So living under two monarchs, being a courtier with Queen Elizabeth and with King James was a very big deal. To have survived was a very, very big deal indeed. So when Bacon talks about those who dissimulate needing a presence of mind and a strong heart, what he's actually talking about is that you need to think quick. You need to think on your toes. You cannot afford to wait. So presence of mind and a strong heart. Therefore, it is the weaker sort of politics that are the great dissemblers. Now, there appears to be a contradiction here between what Bacon has said first and what he said next. Because in the first instance, he says that you need to have a presence of mind and a strong heart to dissimulate. And then he says that those who dissimulate have to be weak politicians. They're not strong statesmen. No way can they be classified as strong statesmen, strong politicians. According to Bacon, it is the weaker sort of politician who is the most successful dissembler. Now again, you need to think of how this text has evolved out of Bacon's personal experience and his knowledge. he has experience of two courts. He knows that courtiers who say what the monarch wants them to say are always more successful. Doesn't make any difference whether they're telling the truth or lying. If they are great dissemblers, according to him, they will be the weaker sort of politicians. There will be more courtiers than statesmen. And you need to remember that Bacon had served both as courtier and as statesman, but we'll go to that later on. Now this particular essay, we're going to be dividing into two lectures. So before I move on, let me show you how we're going to split this into two lectures, because there is so much that Bacon has put into this one essay that it's not possible to cover that in a 60 minutes class. So when we do the second half of this essay, I'm going to take you back to the beginning. So don't think that there's going to be no connection between the first lecture and the second lecture. All right? Now, once that point has been clarified, let's go on to how Bacon exposes or how Bacon tackles this subject of simulation and dissimulation. How many of you remember the kind of education Bacon had? Yes, I do find out that some of you do remember, and yes, you're right, he had a medieval education. Although he lived in the Renaissance age, most of the education that he got was based upon a rather medieval curriculum. And because Latin was the language in the medieval ages, so you see a very strong influence of Latin on Bacon's writings. And it's not just the language, since language and history and culture cannot be divided. You find that one impacts the other and the third also. So the reason why I'm telling you this is one of those essays in which Bacon brings in quite a few references to Roman history. The first one that he starts off with is when he says, Tacitus saith, Livia sorted well with the arts of her husband and dissimulation of her son. Now, Livia is the wife of the Emperor Augustus Caesar. You remember, after the death of Julius Caesar, there was a triumvirate that was formed. 3 people ruled Rome, and one of these was the Emperor Augustus Caesar. Augustus was Julius Caesar's nephew and one of the Roman emperors. Julius Caesar, you know, is generally not known as a Roman emperor. He was going to be crowned king. He was going to be crowned emperor. But just at the moment when they were going to crown him emperor, Brutus stabbed him in the back and Julius Caesar died. So following him, Augustus Caesar became the emperor. And Livia is wife of Augustus and mother of the Roman Emperor Tiberius. So Livia has a very important role to play in Roman history. Now Tacitus, who was a senator, a writer, and a historian of the Roman Empire, is quoting Livia. And he gives the example of Livia and says that she was that wonderful lady who could put up with 2 emperors, one of whom was her husband and the other her son. So the reason why Bacon brings in this reference to Augustus Caesar and Tiberius is that both of them were dissimulators, or as he calls them, dissemblers. They pretended to be what they were not. Now this is the opinion of Tacitus. This is what Tacitus has given in his writings, that Livia put up very nicely, or as you would say, Livia knew how to put up with the simulations of her husband and her son both. So she had a lot of experience. She was renowned for her knowledge, and later she was deified. She was given the status almost of a goddess. That was how strong a role she had to play in Roman history. So going back to simulation and dissimulation, Tacitus says, and again you notice the th ending, the ith is replaced by what? Yes, the ys. So Tacitus says Livia sorted well with the arts of her husband. She knew her husband. Generally, wives do know their husbands. But the reason why Tacitus is quoting Livia is, one, because Livia had a very important role to play in Roman history. Two, and the two arises out of the first, and that is she was wife to one emperor and mother to another. So as such, she had a very important role to play. So Livia was very familiar with the ways and means by which Augustus Caesar and Tiberius ruled the Roman Empire. And they could not have ruled it if they had not been great dissemblers. So the arts of her husband, the tricks, the techniques that Augustus Caesar used, and the dissimulation of Tiberius. So at the very beginning, Bacon is quoting two examples of men from Roman history who are renowned for their dissimulation: Augustus Caesar and his son Tiberius Caesar. And then he takes this example further, and he says, again, when Mucianus encourageth Vespasian to take arms against Vitellius, he says, so this is one statesman encouraging, enticing, inciting the emperor to take up arms against another emperor. All right, a little more of this and we'll come back to how it all links up with simulation and dissimulation. Now, the reason that Mucianus gave to Vespasian was this. All right. We rise not against the piercing judgment of Augustus, nor the extreme caution or closeness of Tiberius. You have to have a justification for starting a war. So let's go back to the previous slide. There was war in which the Emperor Vespasian fought against the Emperor Vitellius, who was emperor for a very short period of time. Okay, and the most well-known fact about the Emperor Vitellius is that he was defeated by Vespasian, and Vespasian continued to rule. So emperors need advisors, and in antiquity these advisors were either generals or statesmen. And when we talk about Mucianus, you find out that he was not only a general, he was also a statesman. So as such, the Emperor Vespasian relied on his judgment to a great extent. Rulers, monarchs are always advised by those who surround them, and in antiquity, just as in contemporary times, generals and politicians advised the emperors. You need to remember the fact that the Romans were great warriors. So as such, the emperor would seek advice from those who surrounded him in his court, and those who surrounded him in court would be not only statesmen but also general. So Mucianus states that when he encouraged Vespasian to fight against Vitellius, the reason that he gave, and the reason is stated by Francis Bacon, the reason that was given was, we rise not against the piercing judgment of Augustus, nor the extreme caution or closeness of Tiberius. Okay? So this is the justification that one statesman, one general is giving to the emperor, because the emperor needs advice from his courtiers, and all advice that is offered must be very strongly grounded. So what you find Mucianus saying is, this is the reason that we are fighting. It's a war of principles. It is not because we are against the policies of Augustus Caesar. It's not because we didn't respect Augustus Caesar that we are attacking Vitellius. It's not because Tiberius was very reserved and he was very careful of the people he trusted. It's none of these reasons. Our war is a war of principles. We're not fighting for the sake of fighting. We're not fighting because we want land. And you know, this is the kind of statement that statesmen and advisors and generals have been making throughout history. It's not something that is reserved to antiquity. The same kind of thing you see generals and statesmen doing even now, politicians. They have to have a justification for war, and the justification that is given is always that it is a matter of principle. It's not something personal. It's not a vendetta that we are trying to settle. This is something that is related to principles, and it is a matter of nations, not a matter of individuals. So this is the justification that Mucianus gives to Vespasian for attacking Vitellius. All right? And of course, Vespasian was successful in defeating Vitellius, and he continued to rule Rome. So in that sense, you would say that the advice given by Mucianus was not very wrong. It came at the right time, and Vespasian fought against Vitellius, and after defeating him, he continued to rule the Roman Empire, which you must remember extended throughout the length and breadth of what is now known as Europe, and what was then known as Asia Minor, and which is now known as Turkey. So the Roman Empire was really huge. Okay, these properties of arts or policy and dissimulation or closeness are indeed habits and faculties several and to be distinguished. So these properties, these features of arts or policy, that is simulation and dissimulation, are not the same according to Francis Bacon. There is difference between simulation and dissimulation, and in a minute he's going to explain how one is different from another. So he says these arts or these pretensions or this artificiality is very different from a policy or closeness. Now this closeness is not closeness as you and I speak of. It's not a camaraderie. It's not friendship. Closeness here refers to being reserved, not being social, not being antisocial, but not being social either. So this closeness that he's talking about is that reserved attitude that some people have. Now, according to Bacon, you can be reserved. You can also pretend that you are reserved. So simulation and dissimulation, these two terms, Bacon is going to define and discuss in great detail in this essay. For if a man have that penetration of judgment, as he can discern what things are to be laid open and what to be secreted, and what to be showed at half lights, and to whom and when, to him a habit of dissimulation is a hindrance and a poorness. This is a slightly long line, and you'll notice that in this essay Bacon uses more complex sentences than he has in the previous essays. In the previous essays, what you saw were short lines, short sentences, simple sentences, not complex one, not the kind where you have phrases and clauses and it takes you a while to figure out what the writer is trying to say. So this is one of those complex sentences. Let me read this out again so that it is clear to you without even the use of the parentheses. Now these parentheses, some of them are mine, the others are Bacon's. Where you see the meaning given, those parentheses are mine, and I have put them there for your ease and for my own facility. Otherwise, when Bacon uses parentheses, it is to talk about something that is not of primary importance, but is definitely important. So he adds it, but he puts this in parentheses. Let's go back. So if a man have that penetration of judgment, as he can discern what things are to be laid open. Now, it's very difficult to determine what you're going to keep secret and what you're going to reveal to people. There are, of course, some people who cannot keep secrets. So the moment you tell them, please don't tell anyone, they start thinking of who they can convey it to. So that's not the kind of people that Bacon is talking about. He's talking about men who have judgment, men who can discern for themselves, and men who can determine what is going to be made public and what is going to remain private. So you have a person who communicates everything to everyone, and then you have another person who is of a reserved temperament and who does not always share everything that he knows or everything that he finds out. So he says that you need to have a man who knows how to tell the truth, who to tell the truth to, when to tell it, and how much. Now what he's asking for is a lot, but he's talking about statesmen and he's talking about people who are a success in life, and he's comparing those people to politicians and statesmen who do not generally play a very strong role in life or in making a nation, but who are always present, who are at the periphery of great things, who are not directly involved in great things. Okay? So he says, if a man is able to discern what to say, when to say it, who to say it to, and how much to say it, that person does not need to be a dissembler. For such an individual, dissimulation would be, as he says, a hindrance and a poorness. And these qualities are essential for a man who wants to attain success in life. So if a man have that penetration of judgment, where he can discern what things are to be laid open, what things are to be made public, and what to remain a secret, what to be showed at half lights. Now this is a point that we've not discussed. What to be showed at half lights. Half light is always a symbol of what is not quite clear. So half light would be to reveal a little. There are times when you cannot share everything with another individual, but you can give them a hint of what is going on or a hint of why you cannot share. So when Bacon talks about a man who can discern, he's talking about a man who wants to have a role to play in making his nation, a man of discernment, a man of judgment. When you have a man of judgment, he doesn't need to pretend. He doesn't need to act. He is great, and he does not need anyone to teach him artificial ways of getting importance. He is important, he makes a significant contribution, and that is all that he needs. So such a man, Bacon says, will be successful without having to resort to simulation or dissimulation. So again he refers to Tacitus, and when he's talking about to whom and when, he says Tacitus says that there are a few things that are very important in life, and those are that you must be able to keep secrets and reveal them only to people whom you trust, and you must not reveal everything that you know. Remember, he talked about the half-lights, what to be shown at half-lights. Half-light refers to twilight, the time just before darkness falls. So what is to be shown at half-light? What is to be revealed, but not wholly, not totally, not completely, but in portions, in sections. So there are some people with whom you want to share things, but you don't want to share everything. Maybe you want to share one aspect of what has happened. Okay? So men of state or statesmen do not need to dissimulate. In fact, for them, dissimulation is a kind of hindrance, and it's a definitely negative point. It is not going to contribute positively. But if a man cannot obtain to that judgment, then it is left to him generally to be close and a dissembler. So men who cannot attain that height, who cannot achieve that greatness, are forced to dissemble. Men who are not great, in other words, men who are not strong, need to pretend, need to act, need to dissemble. So let's see how Bacon explains these two terms. For where a man cannot choose or vary in particulars, there it is good to take the safest and wariest way in general, like the going softly by one that cannot well see. Now he brings in a very, very strong image, the image of a blind man. Now that's something that is difficult to imagine, particularly by those who are sighted, by those who do not have eye problems. So, the good thing about Bacon is that he doesn't just give you one rule and say, this is what you must do, you must not do anything else. His knowledge, his experience guides him to write of situations which might be different, to write about people who might be different. He's not just writing about the strong and the mighty. He's not just writing about emperors. He's writing about ordinary people also. He's writing about what you'd call perhaps as the lesser mortals. He's writing about you. He's writing about me. So he encompasses all his experience, all his knowledge, his reading into saying that these are the different categories. If you can do this, wonderful. If you can't do that, then you can also do this. If you can't do this, you can do the other. So he's giving you different options. And one place where you see his options are when he says, everyone cannot be a statesman. Everyone cannot be a general. Some have to be foot soldiers, some have to be ordinary politicians, some have to be weaker characters. And it's these people that Bacon talks about now. And he says, where a man cannot choose or vary in particulars, there it is good to take the safest and wariest way in general. And the safest way is to dissemble. The example that he gives is that of a blind man, or one who perhaps is not legally blind, but very short-sighted. So he says, you know what a blind man does? When he cannot see, and it's obvious he cannot see, he doesn't run. For the simple reason that he cannot afford to run. He'll just fall down. He'll hurt himself. His ego will be bruised. So the example he gives of the blind man is relevant to the situation that he creates here, and that is of a man who cannot make decisions involving the whole country. You don't need 100,000 men running the country. You need one head of state, and you need so many different people who will assist him in running the state. So it's those people who assist about whom Bacon is talking now. He says, where a man cannot choose or vary in particulars, there it is good to take the safest and wariest way. So safety and security instead of risks and adventure. Mediocre people, common people, ordinary people cannot afford to take risks. And this category of people who cannot afford to take risks, Bacon brings here, and he says those who can't afford to take risks need to take things easy. They need to see how the world functions and to follow the functions of the world. Now, I need you to think about this. The world is full of people who are statesmen. The world is also full of people who are neither statesmen nor generals, but who are either junior officers or plain soldiers. Such people need to be very carefully. In other words, such people will need to dissimulate, just as a man who is blind walks very slowly because he's afraid of running into someone, he's afraid of being hit, he's afraid because he cannot match the speed of a person who can see. So for such ordinary people, for soldiers, non-commissioned officers, junior commissioned officers, it is always wisest to go slow. And when you go slow, you are also more careful, just as a blind man, when he is walking in the street, even if he has that white cane with him, he is not going to be running with the white cane. Have you ever seen a blind man running with a cane? I have not. So you need to go softly. And ordinary people do need to dissemble at times. But let's do that in great detail. Certainly the ablest men that ever were have had all an openness and frankness of dealing and a name of certainty and veracity. But then they were like horses, well managed. Now, before we go on to dealing with horses, let's see what Bacon has to offer here. He says, the ablest men that ever were have always been open and frank in dealing. Reason. They are in the limelight. Reason 2, they are truthful men, and therefore they can afford to be frank. So those who are the ablest, those who are great statesmen, great politicians, great generals, they invariably speak the truth. They are always honest people. Now this is Bacon's opinion. You might have a different opinion, I might have a different opinion. So the example that he gives is that of horses well managed. But we'll come to that in a bit. So what he's talking about is that the ablest men, the best statesmen, are those who have been truthful and frank. They're not afraid. And one of the things that Bacon is going to emphasize a little later on is that it is fear that makes you pretend. It is fear that makes you lie to another person. But more of that later. Right now he's talking about the ablest men and the fact that they are always truthful, they're always frank, they have nothing to hide, and therefore they do not hide, they're open to the public. So these people are like horses well managed, for they could tell passing well when to stop or turn. Horses that are well groomed and well trained follow the feel of the rider's body and respond to that. They don't have to be whipped, they don't have to be spurred. A soft hand on a horse will tell the horse what he needs to do. Now, if some of my students have a familiarity with horses and with riding, you will know how quickly a horse responds to the slightest pressure on his body. So these horses, they can tell when the rider wants them to turn. You don't have to pull at the reins. You don't have to spur the horse. You don't have to whip him and try to turn his head around. The slightest amount of pressure and the horse knows, because the horse is trained and the horse has been trained by the rider. Now that's the best kind of horse. When he's trained by the rider, he will respond to the slightest pressure because he's well trained. And at such times, when they thought the case indeed required dissimulation, if then they used it, it came to pass that the former opinion spread abroad of their good faith and clearness of dealing made them almost invisible. Okay, now this again is a longish sentence. You see, it starts off with, oh God, it starts off with certainly and goes on and on until it stops with invisible. So we've had short sentences by Bacon. Now that you have had a few lectures and you've had input of Bacon, we've come on to sentences with more complex structures and essay topics that may not be ordinarily discussed, that may not be ordinarily written upon. So going back to this long sentence, he says that these able men, these statesmen, politicians, generals, they are frank and forthright and truthful and honest because they are known for their honesty, because they are renowned for being truthful. The world knows they will not speak the lie. The world knows that they will not tell a lie, and so the world depends on these people. So such people do not need to resort to lies. Such people can tell the truth with frankness, with boldness, and with the confidence that whatever they are saying will be accepted. So once a reputation has been made, then even if these people tell a lie, it's not taken as a black mark. It's not taken as something that is not in their favor, such people are given license. They occupy important positions, they do a lot of important work. So even if they're not working sometimes, people will understand them. People will not object to their not working. You and I, if we're not working, people are not going to object to that. But those who have established their reputations as great politicians, as statesmen, as generals, they don't need dissimulation. So if ever they dissemble, it's ignored. They've done so much good, they've spent so much time telling the truth, being honest and frank and forthright, that a little bitty lie will be forgotten and forgiven. Okay? So, very important point. And then he goes on to the 3 degrees of simulation and dissimulation. As he says, hiding and veiling of a man's self. Bacon is very important of doing things in threes. So, this is another place in which he's doing things by threes. And he says there are 3 degrees of hiding and veiling of a man's self. Generally speaking, you don't associate the veil with the man. Here, it is used to show that men do not always reveal their entire selves. Okay? So, 3 degrees of hiding and veiling. The first, closeness, reservation, and secrecy. So that's the first example. And he explains this further by saying, when a man leaveth himself without observation or without hold to be taken, what he is. So, secrecy, reservation, closeness. So, 3 things he's going to talk about. And he says the first is closeness, reservation, and secrecy. And he describes closeness, reservation, and secrecy by saying that closeness is when you do not share your opinions, when you don't share your impressions with other people. Reservation, when you do not allow people to mingle easily with you, when you are a reserved person, when you keep everyone at arm's length, that's the kind of person who needs simulation. And secrecy. So if you want to keep something secret, then you might have to tell lies. Because when you have a secret, it might be someone else's secret that you're not supposed to reveal. So closeness, reservation, and secrecy. When a man leaveth himself without observation or without hold to be taken what he is. So secrecy and reservation and closeness is when a man has no black marks against him. He's known as a truthful, honest man. And he's taken at face value. Normally we are told that we should not take people at face value because people are seldom what they appear to be, what they pretend to be. So the second, dissimulation in the negative. Now dissimulation is definitely used in a negative context. Always, always remember that. And dissimulation is when a man lets fall signs and arguments that he is not that he is. So if I'm a teacher and I use signs and arguments that I'm not a teacher, that's dissimulation. And I would be guilty of dissembling. So dissimulation is when a man shows by his words or his deeds that he is not what he is. So all of you students sitting out there, you would pretend that you were not students. So what would you pretend to be? Teachers, observers, maybe friends of another student. So he says dissimulation is when a man lets fall a sign or a symbol or an argument or an idea that he is not what he is. Remember, the word that here is no longer used in this sense. This is Baconian English. That's the kind of English that was prevalent in the 16th and 17th centuries. So dissimulation is when you pretend to be something different from what you are. And the third, simulation, in the affirmative, he says, where a man industriously and expressly feigns and pretends to be that he is not. Let me give you a personal example. If I say that I'm the world's best teacher, okay? Let me give you that example. I am guilty of simulation because I'm not the world's best teacher. I might be the best teacher in a small institution, but I am not the world's best teacher. So simulation, he says, is in the affirmative. It does not have a negative connotation, and therefore if a man makes an attempt and provides the background to show what he is not, that is simulation. Again, let me give you another example. You know, you have all these boards, billboards, advertising Dr. So-and-so. The impression that you get at first reading is that this is a doctor who practices allopathy, for example. And when you read the advertisement carefully, you'll find a small homeo written somewhere close to the doctor, but where it is not perceived very easily. So actually it's a homeopathic doctor. It's not an allopathic doctor. It's not a doctor who has an MBBS and who has, let's say, specialization or further qualification. It's an individual who has studied homeopathy. And one of the differences that practitioners of allopathy bring out against homeopathy is that allopathy is studied in greater detail and homeopathy is not. Of course, a lot has advanced, a lot of advancement has taken place in medicine as in many other fields of knowledge. And now even homeopathic doctors say that they need to qualify certain exams before they can actually be, they can graduate and be given the title of a homeopathic doctor. But what I'm trying to tell you here is how simulation works. And that is that when you make a conscious attempt to show that you are something that you're not. I've given you the example of homeopathic doctors. You also have, let's say, teachers. And this is something that's directly related to my own profession. You have teachers who call themselves, let's say, professors. They'll put the prefix of professor before their name, although they have never served at that post, because professorship is something that is given to you on the basis of certain criteria. It might be qualification, it might be years of experience in teaching, it might be the knowledge that an individual has. But whatever the basic criteria, it has to be followed before an individual can get the designation of professor. For example, what is prevalent in Pakistan and is also prevalent in other countries in the academia is that you start off, work as a lecturer, go on to being an assistant professor after a certain number of years and fulfilling certain criteria, and then you go on to associate professorship, and then you become a professor. So the professor is the highest point in the hierarchy. And if you have just done your master's and you write professor with your name, that's wrong. You're simulating, you're pretending to be something that you are not. You are claiming a post that you have never occupied. So now you understand what simulation means? And you know the difference between dissimulation and simulation? Let's quickly go through this differentiation as Bacon has pointed out, okay? So he says basically these are the 3 degrees of hiding. The first is closeness. This closeness includes having a reserved attitude, not sharing things with other people, and generally being very, very secretive. So people might be secretive, they might be reserved, they might just not be in the habit of communicating with other people. And that's the first instance or the first degree of hiding. The second, Bacon says, is dissimulation, and the reason why I'm going over this again is so that when in the next lecture we go on to a further exposition of simulation and dissimulation, the pros and cons of simulation and dissimulation, you are familiar with what exactly these terms stand for. So the second degree, he says, is dissimulation, and this is a definitely negative feature in your personality. And dissimulation is when a man shows that he is not what he is. So I might be poor, but I give signs, I maintain a facade of prosperity. So I'm trying to hide what I'm actually, and that is poor. So you give signs, you give arguments. Maybe I rent a house and I say this house is mine. So I am hiding what I actually am, and that is a person who cannot afford to buy a house. I am pretending. So the second degree, that is dissimulation, is definitely in the negative. The third is simulation, and that is pretending to be what we are not. So is the difference clear to all of you now? You have closeness, reservation, and secrecy. That is the first degree. The second is definitely negative, and that is dissimulation. And you try to pretend and hide. You're not so much pretending as you're hiding who and what you actually are. And the third, that is positive, is simulation, where you make an attempt and you pretend to be what you are not. I think that's enough for today. And in the next lecture, we're going to discuss simulation and dissimulation further. So have a very good day, and thank you very much for being so patient. And I'll see you again in the next lecture. Allah Hafiz.